Here we go. I always like to start with the slide when we start thinking about ownership. 27 years ago, a small company called Amazon.com sold used books, and that was their entire core business. Now they have space programs, and that has a lot to do with something called data. And it's been very interesting how we've watched, record companies and used book companies now afford to be able to launch things into space.
Sorry, can I say something before you continue? I think because you're now the host, if there are other people coming up, you need to admit them.
Excellent. I will keep an eye on the participants.
Top.
Okay, I've added that screen to my screen. So one of the weird things that I always find about Amazon is Alexa, and I have two of these in my house, and a Google one and the Apple one and the Portal one from Facebook. So I really like to understand how much data they're gathering about me. And I do things like put them in disability mode. So especially the ones that have screens, the ones that will tell you everything that they're doing because they don't think you can see the screen, is something really interesting. And it's just amazing how much data they collect on us. There's beamforming microphones in each of these. And what they don't tell you about beamforming microphones is that when it's quiet, they can hear just about everything. And I know this because I was doing a postdoc once upon a time, and that's when I got the first Alexa, and I lived about 8 hours north of here in Aarhus, but my kids still lived in the Netherlands, and I was parenting via Alexa. So I would hear them come downstairs in the morning because I could leave the Alexas on, and it literally would become super loud to the point that I could hear them coming down the stairs. So I asked a few of my friends who are AI people about this, and what they pointed out was the weird thing is that Alexa knows everywhere in your house. They know where you're walking, they know who's walking, just from the sound of your footsteps. And they can do that with the beamforming microphones. And they've got this amazing database on each of us as to what we are and who we are and what we're doing. And if you compare that to all the other data that they can collect on us, they start to have a really deep picture as to exactly who we are and how we operate. And that's how they built their own space program. So we want to figure out how can we use that data to do something different with it. And so I'm going to hand this over to Frank Jan here.
Yes, and then our corporation comes inside. So we are taken over by big companies, Google, Microsoft, Facebook. And that sounds bad, but the good side is that it has happened before. And also earlier, we have found strategies to deal with that. For example, at the end of the 1800s, the big companies like Unilever, Philips, Royal Dutch Shell changed the Dutch economy. And also in the United States, for example, Rockefeller was extremely dominant in the economy because there was new technology developing and economies changed. And that seems to be currently at hand also. And what is fascinating that in various sectors, so talk about fashion, but also in finance, in retail, hospitality, people start thinking about new governance structures, ownership structures. And commons is therein a critical phrase that is used more and more often. And I think that's it's a long shot, but it will be a critical theme for the coming 10, 20 years. And that's why we cooperate. And fascinating there is that it's not only Troy and I cooperating, but a variety of shares is cooperating and see, what are the implications? And I find it interesting already. If I then work with creatives like Troy, they have another, how to say it, grammar almost. I came up with my PowerPoint, and then Troy had some fascinating new technology stuff where my PowerPoint looks very poor, but we try to integrate that into one story. And so next to Troy, also Professor Ingrid Waquet, Jesse Weltevreden, and various other research members are engaged in this new research line that we currently are developing. Next slide, maybe.
Yeah, and I just want to add there, it's creative innovation and economic transformation, I think, go hand in hand. And that's where we really find ourselves here today together.
Yeah. So in the first slides, and that will especially Troy will go deeper into that, we will give an outline of the general theme, and then we will talk further about how we currently see economic transformation. But soon we will specifically focus on ownership transforms and the commons and where we would like to develop further cooperation with various partners in our network and also in this network.
Including some of you.
Yeah. Yeah, so to introduce myself shortly, what I've tried to do within the last 8 years is basically to develop a new perspective on finance and accounting, a perspective that is human-centered, is design-oriented more than economics-oriented only. There's in finance a big how to say it, a tendency to model itself according to economics and econometrics and statistical modeling, and people act differently and behave differently. And also decision making in finance is differently than economic modeling. And this is one of our big research projects, which very much demonstrates how finance is a people business and not a modeling business only. Modeling is still very important if you deal with big chunks of money. It's a project on small SME finance and how people are decisive in that. And within the first hour, an advisor gives you knows what he has to do with you, and that's a lot of intuition and a lot of craftsmanship involved in there. This is a further development in that area. Next.
So from my side, it's a completely different point of view. And I think it's this intersection that's really, really interesting. So I'm a brand new lector. I've been here about 1.5 years, almost 2. I'm learning Dutch. I promise I'm going to the nuns soon. So I will be speaking Netherlands with you, hopefully the next time we do something like this. But my group really is based around a studio. We call it the Wearable Data Studio. We really believe that if we look at how people wear things in terms of data, we can come up with some really interesting ways to make things circular. And we test this in our 3D knit field lab. And these practically look something like this. We do a lot of interesting digital fashion, but then we turn around with digital fabrication machines like 3D printers and the Mach 2SX Shimaseki that you see here that can print out a complete sweater or a complete pair of knitted pants. Or if you look at most of your jeans these days on the inside, you'll realize that they're knitted as well. And so we're really excited about this new kind of economy that develops where we can digitally manufacture things, and how the digital code allows us to make things from that digital code and allows us to change the way that designers work, turning them into something like coders. And that's where I'm really excited to be inside of the FDMCI, the Faculty of Digital Media and Creative Industries, where we bring these two things together. Nothing like having a faculty that has AI and fashion all in the same department, and that's not available anywhere else in the world. So just to give you an idea of what this can look like in terms of creative industries and how we need new models of it, I started off with making a shoe. When I started off my PhD work, I started off by making a shoe for then Minister of Education, Science and Sport, Jet Bussemacher for Prinsjesdag. And we did a 3D scanning of her body and looked at how she walked and created a grasshopper script that generated the shoe for her. And this idea of being able to turn her personal data into a shoe that, as you can see in the upper middle there, has a lot going on the inside actuality. We had to figure out all of these different data-driven elements that would do things like let her walk on it forward but not break her ankle if it twisted the wrong direction. I was making 3D printed flats at this point. I was not making full-on high heels. So this really led to some really interesting things with this idea of where we could really start using code to make design. And if we use code to make design, it becomes syntactic. It becomes language. We can write words that turn into things instead of using designs to turn into things. And that changes the way that we design. And I think that was really interesting, because if you talk to the people in economics and finance, they use numbers all the time. They like numbers, they like code. And if we can turn the design into code, we can marry it to financial concerns and to other things, and that allows us to make things a lot differently. At the same time, I was wondering, what is it like if we let people make their own things? How do we democratize things? So I'm used to usually making pretty fancy shoes like you saw in the first image, but I really asked myself, what would it mean to make a toolkit where anybody could make their own shoes? What would people do with this toolkit if they could make their own shoes? So we went and worked with a Dutch shoemaker, Roderick Peters, to make the most vanilla shoe possible. We wanted just the middle of the road, plain Jane, vanilla as could be shoe. And we put it up on Kickstarter, and we had about 300 of these go around the world. We missed Antarctica, but had we known, we would have sent one to Antarctica as well, to get all 7 continents. And we were really excited. We made this not only an open source project, but an open culture project. We've seen 3 shoe companies use the shoe kit to make their own shoe company. And we've seen homeless shelters especially continue to use our shoe kit to this day to have people who are homeless start by making their own shoes, giving them a sense of self-worth and a sense of doing it differently. It really gave us this idea that there's something different inside of models. So I started looking at circular models, and how do we get to circularity? We look at our current product design systems, it looks a lot like this. Some kind of business person tells them we need this many widgets or this many, if you've ever worked at a shoe company like I have, spent 20 years inside of the design world, you get a list in an Excel spreadsheet of you can use these materials and you need to make it cost this little in the end. And that's really what they tell you. And your 600 euro pair of Gucci shoes that you're buying cost 25 euros and 43 cents to manufacture. So it tells you a lot about what's going on there in terms of our material choices and what we can make these things out of. But we've seen this model changing, and we've seen this model changing a lot as we start to look at service design. Service design really makes us more horizontal. You work with different partners, they do different things, you're all part of it. The user is included there as a user. They should sometimes share these resources. They start to make it in a different way. And let me get Julia in from the waiting room. But what becomes really interesting in this, and that our past research has shown, is that this starts to lead towards circular. If we can start to use the data and look at the data in these processes like the shoes that we saw before, we can start to bring that data back in, especially that data from use. If we can watch how people use things, we can start to use the data on how they use things to reanalyze that and start cycles and circles and circular making. And that circularity of data not only helps us make things, but starts to lead us towards a circular economy. And part of that that's really important for us is that we figure out in that process that it isn't just us in there, that there's more people involved, and that we're not just users, but we're cooperative designers, we're cooperative analysis, we're cooperative in manufacturing, but we're also cooperative in use. If you're using a pair of the shoes that I've made that collects data and I want those shoes coming back when you're done with them, we're co-using those shoes because I as the manufacturer, I as the designer, I'm using the data, you're using the shoes as shoes, but those shoes are data at the same time. And that made us really think about, well, what is this model if we start to ask ourselves, if we're all cooperating with this, that means that there's a physical shoe and there's also a digital shoe because that shoe is data in itself. And so we adopted this idea of digital twinning. And we started to realize something that like the data doesn't line up with the actual thing because digital twins are just like real people. They grow up to be different. You might be a genetic twin, but after 30 years, you've gone to a different career and married somebody different, hopefully. And that taught us that something else is happening in there. We didn't represent that data very well when we talk about creative industries. We tend to see the silos very clearly of design and manufacture and analysis, but all of that data responsibility of encoding the data, materializing the data, creating some profiles, we do it in advertising, but we don't remember it very well. And monitoring that data doesn't happen very clearly. But if we start doing that, we get to some very interesting circular models. And we get to see that there's lots of stakeholders involved there. And in those vast number of stakeholders, we start to look at new ways of making things. We start to look at cooperative contracts. We start to look to NFTs and blockchain because we need different forms of contract. We also start to realize that in the middle of this, there's something that's all that data that's been collected. And what we don't have to have anymore is a large company that does all this. If we can do cooperative, NFT, and blockchain work, and we can create all of that data or encode all that data inside of a blockchain, we start to have a commons that we can work on, something that we can work on commonly to do that. So we look at this model. It's really big for big companies to do this because they own all the data and they own all the silos. But we start to ask questions of how are we going to do this together? How can we own all that data together? And the blockchain really enables that. So once we have kind of a blockchain and we have this new form of owning the data, how do we include other people inside of this? How do we start to build out that network so that it's not just one company looking at the blockchain, looking at the data that's been generated here. It's not just the Amazon or not just the Nike. It becomes something bigger. How do we start to include the users themselves as wearers? How do we start to include society and government as a stakeholder in this process? Because that collective data that we've made together enables something new. And we really find a commons there, and that really starts to enable new things. And that's where working with Frank Jan, it becomes really important because we have this new ability to look at this. But it also means that we need new digital tools. If we're going to be a co-production in this, if we're all going to come together, we've got to build something new there in terms of the tools that we use to look at this. And we don't know what those are yet. And that's why we're really excited to come together as part of CET and as CoECI to ask, what are the tools that enable us to really do this together and to make it more sustainable, to really truly look at circularity and sustainability. And if one of our other friends are in this is looking at regenerative business models. So how do we do it different and how do we do it better? That's
maybe to add to that, finance and accounting is the whole purpose of finance and accounting is basically to work with data and to value certain data, and the data of certain people is much more of value than the data of other people, and that becomes financialized. There are a lot of bad sides on that, but also a lot of good sides on it. The prosperity, at least of Western countries, is very much based on those financial mechanisms. For example, that entrepreneurs can get a loan, that we can get a loan, and that enables us to buy a house, or currently makes it difficult to buy a house for some people. Those critical mechanisms, so the underlying structures and the ownership structures are very critical. And that's also one of the critical issues currently in the new Center of Expertise, Center for Economic Transformation. And the purpose, governance, networks, ownership, and finance is critical if you want economic transformation, if you want to go to circular economy, if you want to go to new innovative products. In those processes, it's not only that sustainability is key there, but that's very much data-driven, information technology-driven. That's all. We are not able to communicate in this way if there's no information technology. This meeting already says it.
Yeah, and I know this personally, just because I had a shoe company. We blew through 60,000 euros pretty quickly, realizing that the financial model didn't work. And that's where I think it's really interesting to really try to find these new financial models, because the technology often is there, but the finance system's not. And so working together, we can find these new systems.
And if we want to add something to that as a University of Applied Sciences, that interdisciplinary working is very critical. Finance without design is nothing. And design needs finance also. And design needs also certain products to design, and certain users to design. User experience is very critical there. And that are interdisciplinary questions. And that's asked for cooperation, but that's also challenging, because then you really have to understand each other, and that's very difficult. Also in these ages when information technology has its limits also, which we experience currently also. Maybe next slide. So the Center of Economic Transformation, the ambition is to transform business models and business education to become purpose-driven, sustainable, regenerative, and distributive. Focusing on sustainability, digitalization, and work. Or I see a typo there, and that's directly related also to our professors of practice, Kate Roberts and Marlene Sticker, with her stack economy. Next slide. So, and we have developed 4 teams. We have a group of professors. So craftsmanship, the new professional, what does EFC needs? Ownership transformed, we talk about it today. Regenerative business models and business systems transformation. And as you maybe can think of, that those topics are very much interrelated. That makes it challenging also. And we will further go on to that ownership transformed and what would we like to do there? Where do we see the challenges and opportunities for us as communities to work together on this theme? Next slide. This is Kate Roberts, donut economy. I hope you are all aware. I more or less assume she is our professor of practice, very well known for the donut economy. A lot of, I think, very relevant initiatives also in Amsterdam, who wants to be the donut city. And again, she puts ownership, finance, shareholders, networks, purpose in the center. If we want to change economies, then that ownership question is very critical. We have to feel ownership ourselves, but also think about the ownership structures that currently exist and how we can make it more distributive and more serving society instead of serving a certain amount of groups. And then the other one is Marleen Sticker, probably much more known in the creative industries. I think with the Waag, she very much has developed a center of expertise, how a center of expertise should be. Very inspirational, and with her stack approach, there the ownership issue is also very critical. She is also very interested in our work, in what we are currently developing. One of the inspirators, I think, for this team. If you want to develop an internet that is serving societal needs and serves us all, then what are the underlying structures? Who is developing the software? Who is owning the data? That is very, very critical. And we are on the start of regaining ownership or transforming ownership. So, and then these are basically the two. I think there's also a diversity and equality version in this, but we have not explored that further yet. The third Havia professor of practice that's currently that was installed 1 or 2 weeks ago. Idrissi was his name, or I probably pronounced this wrong. Next slide. And this is, you came with this example. I very much like it. Here you see the good and the bad sides, and then Troy will add. This is Funda. Most people know it. If you want to buy a house or also hire a house. Fascinating here is that real estate agents, local real estate agents, have a strong market position because they together developed a data platform, Funda. For example, in the hospitality business, they were not that smart. Hotels are currently depending on booking.com, but the real estate agents developed their own platform. They have currently some governance issues also, but this gives them a strong power on the real estate market still, and still a local power. So here you see something of distributed ownership already, and how it can work well for smaller companies and businessmen that are active in a local community. But there's much more underneath it, and maybe Troy can explain 1 or 2 issues here.
Yeah, this is where I think it's always really interesting when we start co-owning data and we start sharing these things and creating these platforms. Very quickly, companies like Google and Facebook see the value in them, and they want that data immediately. And I always find it really interesting whenever I'm logging into a website. The first indicator is the social login, because when there's a social login, like login with Facebook or login with Google, it usually means that it comes with a whole bunch of advertising. So they in order to put those social logins there, they agree to other things as well. And I think it's interesting that Funda is a form of commons. It is a way of sharing. It's a digital tool to share all of the listings, and it really brought things together. But as I always like to do, I dig into those end user licensing agreements that nobody reads. things that people like to skip over really quickly. And you'll find two things labeled as legitimate interest in there. That means that they're saying under the GDPR, they don't need your consent for this. They're saying that because it's of interest, legitimate interest to everybody, they can do it no matter what. And those two things that they're saying they do is that we use the data to make, analyze, and make analyses and business reports in order to keep a good overview of the functioning of our platform and to optimize our business operations. So they're saying, oh, we're just making our website work, but then they start to say, oh, our whole business is actually taking the data that you're giving us. In some cases, we share the resulting insights with market partners, but only on the aggregate level. So that's okay. That sounds like they're just taking everybody on your block and saying everybody on this block pays this much for their house. You know that that's an important thing that Funda does. But it's pretty easy to fingerprint a person if we know which block they live on and figure out who they are. Now, in legitimate interest number 2, it gets a little bit darker. We call these dark patterns. We may use your pseudo-anonymized personal data to make advertisements relevant to you. Pseudo-anonymized to these companies means your email address. And if they've got your email address, they probably know who you are based upon other sources. To limit the privacy impact, we use security details such as hashing. Oh, great, they've hashed it, but they've probably fingerprinted it all already. If we engage third parties for this, we make agreements with them to guarantee privacy. Well, they're guaranteeing that everybody pretends that they don't know what they're doing. We also ensure that the frequency at which we show the relevant advertisements is limited. So they've had to add that fourth one by law, that they can only use it so many times in a month. But that means that they're already selling this data off to Google and Facebook, which I always find really fascinating, that even the most commons of platforms that are localized, that are really only for this country and really support the Netherlands, are selling the data out to Google and Facebook almost immediately. So I'd like to always point that out.
So here we see then that various ownership issues arising, and we hardly are aware of it. And this is an example of some positive, that local SME real estate agents managed to keep their market. And where the hospitality businesses, was different. But there you see also a lot of the other data issues underneath that ask for further awareness and also alternative approaches to the use of data and how you can use that for the societal well-being. I think,
Yep. Another example that we see of this, though, is the GenCloth project. And we've been really, really proud as the FDMCI and as my Lector to support our researcher in residence and artist in residence every year. And this is our researcher in residence for this year, Elizabeth Bigger. What she's been doing is figuring out a way to digitize the fashion process, toolkits for 3D garment design and 2D pattern nesting, and creating open databases that work off the blockchain to really use an open body database to fit it to people, 3D sustainable materials database to start to ask how do we use more sustainable materials, or at least understand the impact of the material choices we are making, construction and durability, 2D sloper databases, all of this to come together to create a interesting circular fashion design system. And with us, she's been creating an NFT system that allows different people to be engaged with this. So every party brings their own parts to it, and yet you can coin an NFT that isn't just a digital fashion thing that you wear. It's the actual right to manufacture one of these. And that becomes really interesting because we can do things like connect to immigrant labor forces. So you can imagine how many people are tailors here in the Netherlands. There's not many tailors left if we really think about it. But if we look at the immigrants that are coming here, we find a lot of tailors, especially from countries that are war-torn and that are refugee status at the moment. So if we can connect to that local tailoring talent, we can actually manufacture locally again. We just have things like language barriers that NFT technology allows us to get past because we can do really visual kind of ways. But we're looking, it's this connection of the economic model to the connection of the physical design model that really is the challenge at the moment. And we're only starting to come up with answers to this and develop tools for it.
Yeah, so I think we have to. This is more the general idea of ownership transformed. So how can we basically take back control? How can professional citizens and consumers take back control and empower and create sustainable communities. That is the big theme behind it. Next slide, maybe, that to make it very or more specific. And we work together with various shares. We have expertise in, for example, retail and shopping streets, and how can small shopping streets, for example, create their own delivery services, on a cooperative basis. That could be a solution. Where I come from, financial services, for example, accounting firms, small SME accounting firms become very dependent of big technology firms. How can they create their own data platforms and have a key role in that? Think about Funda, for example. And of course, fashion, Troy is on the table. There are critical developments there also that needs different ownership structures to be successful. Maybe you can add to that, Troy.
Yeah, in fashion in 2025 has to recycle everything. There has to be separate recycling bins. And beyond that, we're starting to get into this idea of EPR, extended producer responsibility. We're already seeing this in Germany and France, where the people who recycle it are the people who manufacture it. So we're going to be, as fashion and fashion designers, we're about to have all of the things we make show back up at the place we manufactured them. This is a great opportunity for looking at the data that's associated with the things we make, and then learning how to take those materials and recycle them again. But if we're going to do that, the fact that it's going back to the person who manufactures it and they're using the data, we have new and interesting questions of ownership developing. Because if we're not really the owner of it during its lifetime, we're just renting it or borrowing it, we're not the owner. We're a leaser at that point, or we're a co-owner. We're starting to have these new relationships develop as to who owns the thing and who owns the data, and how can we share that.
And what I find very fascinating, so underneath these completely different sectors, different traditions, they have similar issues. Data has changed their role, and that has then also changed the ownership of where they're working on. Again, the accounting firms for this audience is probably not interesting, but they have to do a lot of it supervisory authorities, for example, the tax authorities, but various other authorities. They have to ensure that the data quality and integrity. That can be their key role, but that key role can be taken over also by big technology platforms. Google is also trying to take over financial services, and Apple, and they can do your bank services. Do we want that to happen, or do we think financial services should be taken in our own hands? So data changes the companies. Smaller companies struggle very much with the adoption of new technology, and to enable them to stay successful, alternative governance structures are needed. And currently, on various areas, those alternative governance structures are developed. Think about stewardship models, cooperatives. And by working together, we can learn from each other, and we can set benchmarks for various sectors. And that's the objective of this center of expertise in this specific research area where we are active on. And again, it's research, but it's applied research. It's working, developing things with companies, with professionals in the professional field.
Tools, toolkits, code, applications, demonstrators, exemplars. We want to make these things with you as a co-production.
Yeah, that's critical. That's also called engaged scholarship, but that's for another time to discuss that. I'm very much in favor of that.
Excellent. So this is our big call out. Please come join us.
To regain control about your data, about your firm, your identity. And we, of course, focus then on a specific issue in that. We want to develop this agenda further and make it much more specific and specific. Applied research is our key asset. That means that we create together an innovative learning environment, possible also with you and your colleagues. So.
Excellent. And that's the end of our slideshow.
for now. And we are aware that that's also, for example, in HVA, various other chairs, professors are active on this. Also, I know that Sabine Niederer, for example, has done very relevant work on commons, and also Stan Major from the, how do you say, policy studies, is active in this area. So that there is more going on, but this is the perspective we are currently developing, and we see a lot of opportunities to co-develop with them. For example, I worked with Stan Major on civic crowdfunding, in which you use platform technology for civic problems.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a lot happening here. We'll open for some questions. We'll go ahead and stop sharing the screen.
It's very quiet. Have we blown you out?
Or is it just too crazy to comprehend? Because we're still at the, what we would call in design, the fuzzy front end of this. How do we learn to communicate with each other? And how do we learn to do something with this? Because we really see this as an important area for applied research. But that doesn't mean we understand it yet. Casper.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Thanks
Hi.
for the very interesting presentation. I'm Casper Lange. I work at the Faculty of Technology, HVA, and I'm a PhD candidate, finishing my PhD. And I worked with a student who modeled commons around waste in the context of circular economy. And this was a case of, very low value organic waste being reused in a biodigestion system to create biogas and fertilizing material. The student used the commons theory to model how this should work and how bundles of property rights might influence how these waste streams were connected and how this all would turn out in terms of value creation, etc. So I indeed recognize some of the things that you mentioned about ownership, property rights, accessibility, who owns what. So maybe we should talk further on this topic. I just wanted to mention it, and really congratulate you on these efforts already. Let's stay in touch.
Thanks, Casper. I really need to talk to you. I'm trying to create a viscose bioreactor. So instead of making biofuel, turning it into yarn. So
cool.
we have something interesting to look at there together, because I think, if I remember right, both can come out of the same bioreactor if you do it right.
Okay, nice.
Awesome.
Let's keep in touch.
Yeah, I just wrote your name down because that was like, bioreactors are not the only one.
Great.
And maybe I can add to that. If you talk about sustainability, then there's a tendency to organize it in details, and you start to measure all kinds of things, and you try to make models out of that. Governance structure is how do you say it, an overlay or I would say a more interactive model, which you say, okay, I will not organize all the details, I will organize the power structures.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it more effective to organize people. You cannot organize everything on a detailed level of data. But that's maybe too theoretical for now.
Well, let's have a good discussion about this. Great.
Excellent. Oh, Luce, I think you're muted.
No, I was just curious if there were other questions. I'm more curious about, like, of course, this is a great story. I mean, amazing things that you guys are doing, working together already, above faculties with like lots of partners that you're already talking about. But I'm just curious, like, what kind of partnerships are you looking for in this program or in this development process? Like, are there like particularly like, okay, this is what we missed, or this is a partner that we really would like to work with, or how can these people here in this room maybe connect you with, or maybe be the one that is the connection.
Yeah, I think our first big objective here is to actually get a sprong behind this. And so we're looking for partners that want to do sprongs with us. And I think that that becomes really fundamental to the process of getting this to be something, to build this up into something larger. And so I think what's really key is companies that are looking to use data in order to enable circularity. And I hope that I've given some examples of how the creative industries can do that, because there's ways of turning what you do creatively into code. And once you have it as code, it really allows access for other systems to integrate with it. And that's something that's not easy, I know, and it took me 4 years to even begin to figure that out in terms of research. But I think it's something that's really fascinating that happens once you can do that. And so artistic partners that are looking to really, generatively make the things they make is something that I'm looking for and forward to working with in this project.
And you work together with, you work together with Marleen as well already, and with Waag?
Yeah, Marleen Sticker and us, Marleen hosted us for a workshop where Frank Jan and I came in to really understand how, because I work, for example, on the physical and data stack, where Jan's working more on the information and societal stack. And so figuring out how we fit in our stacktivism model and how we can turn this into a stack of donuts, I think is something that we're really interested in.
Yes, and Marleen is also interested in, for example, working more with the Waag and small SME companies, and how you can organize them in, for example, commons. Mm-hmm. Create economic power. And then, for example, I work with auditing firms, and Jesse Weltevreden works with retail firms. Now, that are interesting sectors, and that can be combined with fashion. So we can offer also, how do you say it, the areas in which the stack idea can further develop.
Yeah, we from CoECI are together now with the learning communities of FDMCE, developing a minor public stack together with Waag. So that could be also a great opportunity because we work together with FMR, HBO Rechten, HBO ICT, storytelling. We're also searching for a new partner from FPA in this. But then we bring like the knowledge from partners together in this minor. And then from there, after results come in February, we can scale up also research, things that came out of the research. Like that's a way of we try to get the public stack into the college system. And I guess also Barbara has something to tell about the donut, where she's busy with her minors together with Jen. And there are like so many great, like small entrances that can grow out to get like a nice CD to scale up. Yeah, great. A lot of things happening, like at the Center of Expertise where we're working is like every day, like this kind of meetings, so much inspiring conversations. Yeah, but we're going to have a conversation with Kate and Marleen at the 22nd of February, at April. I just sent you guys this in the chat. The program will be soon online. And you're also really invited, and maybe also can be part of the program in that date to talk further about this and how we can actually join forces together with the different faculties and the different partners that they work with and you already work with to scale this up to, yeah. That's
Hey, can I ask Bernard what he wants to ask?
Yes, thank you. Thank you again, Troy, and also Frank Jan, for the interesting presentation. I've worked with Frank Jan already before in what is called an Erasmus grant project. And I just wanted to let you know that we have just been given a new grant. We applied for a grant together with partners abroad, amongst them also Frankfurt Business School. They have a blockchain center, and the grant is about blockchain technology. It's called Generation Blockchain. And the aim is to increase the knowledge about blockchain technology amongst lecturers and students. The people who are involved are Mike Russell and also Peter Lake. And I myself, I'm more the administrative side, so project management side. And I just wanted to make you aware of this and hope that I can call on you or our colleagues can call on you sometimes in the next 2 years when this project is running for knowledge sharing.
Great. I've been working with the blockchain miner in Hobby ICT quite a lot because so many of the things that we're doing, the current blockchain standards don't really allow us to do it, or they're not quite there yet. So I always have a blockchain team every year it runs to be like, okay, how do we develop the standard a little bit further so that it actually matches what we're trying to do in society with this? So that's exciting to hear.
Well, thank you.
And also congrats, and you know where to find me.
Yes, I know. That's why I'm here.
Cool. Hey, I'm also looking for people from Rietveld or from AHKK in Holland as well, because we do these CoECI Zijgelden projects, and that's part of what I'm trying to design right now. So if anybody's out there that does immersive fashion or is looking for new ways of making clothing there that really change the economic model, circularity, that's something that we're really interested in.
Well, I'll pop on to say a quick hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, I'm Susanna. I'm from in Holland, so one of the named ones. I work a bit with Luce as well, but I also work at our sustainable media lab. So not fashion, but we're also studying a lot about artificial intelligence and kind of more sustainable ways of imagining digital technologies. So just listening to your talk today, I wasn't sure if there would be an overlap with fashion, and you've convinced me otherwise. If we could bring maybe that to the table, I'd be happy to have a chat sometime to see if our lab would want to collaborate in some way.
Cool. Being in the Faculty of Digital Media, I've come to see fashion as a form of media in many ways. It's just a very personal form of media.
Yes, I've always thought of fashion as art, but now I'll take on board fashion as media as well.
Well, fashion was art until, H&M came along and turned it into media. Awesome.
If fashion is communication, then it's also art, and we can include all kinds of arts. Art and business are also a very interesting combination. So there could be yet another perspective on things.
Yeah, and I know Frank Jan has some interesting theater projects running in his lectorat as well. So figuring out new ways of how changing an ownership, NFTs are already changing ownership in art. So yeah, that becomes something really fascinating.
Absolutely. That's actually one of our research projects, is we're working with an NGO to study about NFTs and is there a sustainable art ecosystem we could make with NFTs, thinking about these ideas of ownership. But it's so interesting because you of course think of NFTs maybe as visual art, but there's a lot going on with music as well. And it's very interesting to see what the digital form of art is going to look like in the next few years.
Well, I think it gets really much more interesting if you can turn that digital art, like turn your physical thing into the digital definition as well. If you look at the machines that say make our sweaters, there's code that drives that machine. And so that's, that can be made into an NFT. And if that's an NFT, the physical object's an NFT too. Anyway, yeah, I think there's some really fun things there about to happen. So anytime you move anything to a digital manufacturing machine, you have the basis for a blockchain element, whether it's an NFT or some other kind of blockchain, something magic starts to happen there. Now, if we could only read people's minds and turn their thoughts into NFTs, we could sell those too.
Oh, maybe that's a little scary.
Sorry. I'm a business ethics lecturer at Amsterdam. So I'm wondering about all the moral issues attached to rethinking ownership, to technology like blockchain. There's so much going on. So one of the things I struggle with is that it's so much and so quickly, so fast, that is for me quite hard to follow. So I wonder how ordinary citizens, employees, etc., would have a say in how we would develop things and how we would indeed rethink ownership.
I come to my classic creator opinion of, in order to have a say in it, you have to be part of the ones creating it, and like creating the toolkit, creating the tool that makes it. And so that's where I try to include people more in the tool making and the toolkit process, because there we create a design space of everything that can be made. So getting them involved in that process really gives them the opportunity to define what it can make.
Yes, and I think that it's questionable if the issue of ownership will change society very quick. I doubt, and I doubt even if it's good that it changes societies in a fast way. I think it's more a long shot, but we started to become aware of that maybe the structures in which we function have critical limitations, and that we should rethink them. And that's what we started to do here. And again, I find it very fascinating. In 2007, the shareholder model of banking collapsed. But we haven't invented new banks yet. We are aware that it's not working. And now how can we develop something new? Those things take time. But we can help various sectors, and that's fascinating. For example, auditing firms approached us that they want to do something with the platform economy. So there is also a drive from those very conservative firms to say, hey, we have to do something differently, and maybe this can be something for us. And that's interesting. And you see it also in retail and also in fashion. And then if you bring that together, it becomes stronger. It can become a snowball from a mountain.
Yeah, it's really indeed very fascinating. And from my part also, thank you so much for both your intriguing and enlightening presentations. So I just wanted to comment on the fact that all these changes are always connected to our norms and values, and questions of who's in charge, who has the power to change, what kind of algorithms do we use, how are these algorithms defined, by whom, etc., etc. So I think there's a lot to say about this. So I'm intrigued. So thank you.
Yeah, that's where I love to get people to make it themselves, because that enables them to have the conversation about the bigger companies and to have a vocabulary that allows them to even begin to access much of that.
And I think Flan, you also had a question, and then after that we're going to wrap up, I think, because the time.
I have a question referring back to the image you shared about the circular model between the consumer and the producer. First of all, I was wondering, how do you account for the energy? Because I assume that these processes require quite a bit of energy that has to be sourced from somewhere, because that's probably one of the limitations that doesn't make it circular. And I also wonder how would you include the producer of the material themselves, or the person who extracts the raw material in it, because I didn't see how they were involved in the process. Those are my points of curiosity.
No, that's a really interesting question. I think that accounting for life cycle analysis, and I always put that just in the co-manufacturing circle, but it is a quite deep circle, and quite deep stack, if you were to put it in the way of Marlene Sticker. I think what becomes really interesting there is that as you start to make things data, you can actually account for much of that. You can start to actually understand how much embodied energy is actually there. I think it gets to be really interesting if we look at things like cotton. What cotton doesn't want you to know is that when you recycle cotton, in order to take that cotton back to white, because they want it pure white so they can dye it the specific color of blue again in fashion, it actually takes more embodied energy to recycle cotton than it does to just make brand new cotton. And so we have some really deep and interesting questions to confront there, because recycling may not be the best answer if we consider energy and coal, like coal burning sources, because most of it's made in China anymore, to be the way that things are made. It might be actually better for the environment to grow brand new cotton than actually recycle cotton, which blows a big hole in our whole circular idea. And I think it's true that the data has to come there, and that data enables us to actually look at those decisions and then look at those economic models and which one makes the most sense. Frank-Jan, any comments there?
No, sorry. I very much liked your explanation.
Okay. Yeah, I think that and then for me, it all comes down to unless we can quantify it a little bit more, we can't actually start to have the qualitative discussion around those things. And it's we really need to have both in order to really make change happen and prove that we're making change happen.